Hello, folks. Welcome to Catalyzing Coherence. I'm joined, as always, with Matthew Prokowski.
Hello, everybody.
And
How's
today we have the esteemed pleasure to have Alexander Laszlo with us. We were talking about how should we introduce Alexander, and I'm just going to let him tell us how he thinks of the work he does and how he actually puts it into words, because it's quite poetical.
The work I do, it's work, play, learning. I am a student of life, so I'm not coming with knowing, but I really cherish this opportunity to explore with you some of the things that are playing around in my head and in my heart and in my connection. So a lot of that has to do with seeing the world in terms of patterns, in terms of relationships, in terms of processes, rather than in terms of fixed things, in terms of certainties, in terms of structures. I'm more interested in the flow and then the confluence. How do we flow together? So I was mentioning before, just before we started, that on one of my signatures and email, I have holistic being, transcendent consciousness, and curated emergence as kind of the three areas that I like to explore, and especially where they connect. How can we be curators of life and of creative emergence, right? But ones that are opportunity increasing, that are future creating, and that are life affirming. So these are, and how do we do that together?
Right.
So this is really my play space.
Yeah, it's beautiful because Matthew and I similarly go quite deep into the realms of what is reality and try to understand the nature of consciousness in the cosmos and all the different ways it takes form and shape. And to find other people that have been doing such things, and then us seeing that the language is so similar, that the conclusions we reach, as if there is some timeless truth that we can know and feel and understand in a way that has meaningful real-world value and applications and insights. And the work that you're doing, and the Institute as well, you can talk about. I think we wanted Matthew. Well, let's just start here. Matthew, we met on Friday at the interval. We have these happy hours at the interval on Fridays at Fort Mason here in San Francisco. And I told Matthew that night, I was like, okay, we're going to have Alexander on the podcast. Today's Sunday, Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all fathers out there and the elders. And Matthew's mind got to thinking as well, because he's someone that he thinks very deeply about all these issues. And he had a few basic points that I'll let him introduce in terms of just some of the things, that hopefully the ground we want to cover today with you while you're here in this first installment maybe of many in which we can get together and talk about such issues. So please, Matthew, what were some of the topics that we're hoping to discuss today?
Yeah, definitely. So, first of all, when you sent me Alexander's information, I was absolutely struck by the amount of symmetry between the type of work that you've spent your life developing or working on, and what we're trying to bring to the public in terms of the awareness of these thematics that are beginning to kind of break ground into the public consciousness and find their place in public discussion and public discourse. And looking through some of your work, there were some themes that really jumped out at me. And maybe we don't need to go through all of these, but we were talking about one. We don't need to go all of them at the top. We can cover them organically. But you were talking about this concept before we started the video of syntony. And it aligns with this idea of resonance or entrainment, but perhaps you could go into what you mean by this concept of syntony and how that plays a role in steering or helping these emergent systems find a guidance, so to speak.
Right. Kind of evolutionary leadership and those kind of skills.
Yeah,
bring to that,
definitely.
Right? Well, I came across the term syntony when I was looking at the work of Teilhard de Chardin. He's somebody who uses that term, syntony. He uses it in a very spiritual way. But he uses it in terms of the way in which, in the evolution of human beings and of consciousness, he sees that at some point in the not too distant future, we're going to be able to communicate with each other. It's not ESP, but it's direct levels of understanding. It's sort of embodied empathy of the kind that we all already can do. It's just that when we have a lot of institutions and a lot of setups that don't structural setups in our society that don't honor that knowing, that way of knowing that connects. There's this really interesting Netflix series now called Sense8.
Yep.
Right. Postulates this thing about
Wachowskis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wachowskis, right? I thought he was from Monsters Inc., but okay. And it postulates this homosensorium. So great. It's a movie. It's entertainment and so on. But it's interesting because it's in the field, this sense of being able to explore reality in ways that go beyond just the five senses, just the five, empirical senses that we have for direct observation.
The domain of more complex sensorium.
Exactly. And so syntony relates to this in as much as it's a sense that we can cultivate. And it's been kind of atrophying in human beings for a long time, especially since we've become so reliant on technology and we have things that cut us off from ourselves and from nature. The fact that we wear shoes all the time, for example, right? We're not in touch with the earth. There's a whole level of communication that is stopped there. Imagine wearing gloves all the time, right? Well, we do that, but on our feet.
It's kind of like we're almost trapped within our own abstractions. Too many layers of abstraction.
And when you take that then into our devices that we get the zombification of people, and then we become not app enabled but app dependent.
Yeah,
all of this stuff tends to take us out of connection. So syntony is about creating connection that has resonance, right? But you can be resonating with all kinds of things. You can be resonating with a disease or with a more of a fascist regime. You can, but how do you resonate with things that are life affirming, future creating, and opportunity increasing for everyone, not just for yourself? Opportunity increasing. So that syntony is about listening into those patterns of emergence that have those characteristics: life affirming, future creating, and opportunity increasing. And I think in the animal domain and the plant kingdom as well, there's different intelligence, but there is this mutual adjustment. You see these flocks of birds, murmuration of starlings. You see them fly together.
So beautiful.
It's beautiful.
So
and if you look at it from a distance, it looks like one being. Right? There's almost a clear outline. Right? There's no central tower saying, okay, bird 589, turn left,
Right.
And they don't crash into each
emergent
other.
coherence.
How do they go so quickly? Now that's a true sense of syntony that they have.
That's syntony.
Right? How can we do that? It kicks in for us when we step into an elevator and we kind of adjust like where we are.
Yeah.
But we can practice this and cultivate this listening into.
Well, that has a lot to do, it seems like, with the evolutionary domain as well, where in our lives, especially within our Western society, we are quite isolated as individuals, and we've lost touch with the idea that this deep emergent evolutionary pattern acts not only at the individual level, but also like the starlings at the group level in terms of shaping all of our interactions and what actually does help us to form these more elegant or beautiful or capable formations, greater formations, and not just the individual species or the individual member of a species and what allows that single individual to optimize its local reality. There's a deep layer of how it all works in terms of the complex emergent system.
And that fascinates me. I mean, this is the stuff that I think right now we as a species are coming into becoming more aware of. And if we can turn that awareness into curiosity that we can help begin to explore, what would it mean to be, not to lose our individuality, but to also be part of a collective being.
Yes.
And I don't mean like Star Trek The Borg, I don't mean being assimilated and then losing.
Like an orchestra creating a symphony together.
That's right. Yes. And I like the metaphor of improvisational jazz, because
we do too.
We talked about that on a couple of other podcasts. It's a beautiful metaphor.
I think that's what the universe has been playing since time immemorial, right?
Namaste.
Yeah. So how do we for me, if you take that metaphor, you have to be a good improvisational jazz player. You have to actually know how to. You don't pick up an instrument and just start. You have to really know music.
as
well. Right?
And you have to know who you're playing with, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And
you
when
know,
you
like
have
both the rigid, or not the rigid, but you need to know something about the more abstract rule set, but also be deeply in touch with the reality of the moment.
this is where this organization, I'm part of the Laszlo Institute for New Paradigm Research, is set up exactly to be able to provide that kind of knowledge basis. What is coherence, supercoherence in physics? What's entrainment? What's entanglement? And how does that manifest at the social level as intertwinglement, which is actually a term?
I love that.
Intertwinglement.
And it's not a term we invented, but it's a
We're
it's a term
twinkling with intertwinglement.
It's nicer than entanglement, isn't it? I mean,
It is.
entanglement, it's okay
Yeah,
for quanta to be entangled. but
Entanglement sounds like I have something like stuck, you know, but
it's a problem with your hair.
intertwinglement is...
It's nice. There's
like,
some magic with it.
There's something poetic or light, like we're ballerinas dancing through the cosmos.
There's some magic with it.
It taps into that intersubjective element of it as well.
And so, with jazz, I think, there's this this sense of being able to have that play space. Of course, this music's creative. And if you're in a jazz ensemble and you're playing in a smoky basement at night when it's thundering outside and there's a storm and people are down there, right? You can
Jamming.
You're jamming. You got a very different, it's going to evolve differently than if you're at the jazz festival, the Monterey Jazz Festival.
Environment matters.
In the daytime, with people dancing outside in nature.
Totally.
It's going to change.
It's that feedback system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you listen, the jazz music, listen into not just what's in their head or in their heart, or just each other, but the whole place.
Right. It adapts to where it finds itself.
Indeed.
As does life.
And see, this for me is the cool thing, is that not only does the music evolve and adapt, but in evolutionary terms, the instruments evolve while we're playing.
It's autopoetic in that sense.
Yeah,
And
totally.
Our hands evolve too. It's all mutual co-evolving.
Yes, it is.
And letting that happen, you have to be able to. If you were really stuck on saying, I need this instrument, and I need certainty, and I need control, and I need it to stay fixed, then you can't be part of this symphony dance conversation.
Yeah. That generative tension is really interesting between some amount of structure and some amount of fluidity to be able to simultaneously be able to perpetuate itself with enough structure, but be loose enough to explore the territory so that you can adapt.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to get your take on something. In one of our earlier episodes, maybe it was the first or second even, we were talking about the jazz metaphor.
Right.
And we were talking about the relationship between the jazz metaphor and tempo. And if we are playing this jazz piece together, what relationship or what happens when the tempo starts accelerating? Does it get more difficult? Do we change our behavior?
Right.
How do we adapt to that rapidity that we're faced with in the world today?
For me, it has to do with harmonics, right? So the tempo may speed up at certain levels, but then there can be a deeper rhythm that one can tap into as well.
Baseline rhythm
that connects to that tempo,
the heartbeat,
at a very different rate. And it's doesn't control it, doesn't hold it back, but it establishes also another rhythm that maybe helps make it less frenetic.
Right.
Certainly in this area, in Silicon Valley here, there's hyper competition, right? And they're even talking about hyper competition, right? Which is the next. People
Runaway
don't last
positive
more
feedback
than,
loop.
You don't last more than 7 years in this type of guerrilla strategy corporation.
It's burnout. Like literally, just like what happened in a circuit with too much positive feedback with electricity or with sound, where you get feedback. It's like it either bursts your eardrums or burns out the circuitry or burns out your being as a person who's trying to build.
When we see this people take their lives, right? They seem to be happy, right? It was just recently we've had this happen as well. And because of this, I think this lack of connection, you know this concept of Ubuntu, it's also an operating system.
Yeah.
But it's an ancient holding coming out of the Zulu and the Xhosa tribes of South Africa. And here in our Western cultures, we have so much, and I don't want to put everything on poor old Descartes. He did his stuff, and it's okay. It was right at the time. Everyone is ragging on him. But it's still, I think, therefore I am. I mean, he said, "Dubito ergo cogito, cogito ergo."
I am, therefore I think is more.
But it's still I.
It's
still
true.
I am.
Which says little about how the I became the I.
That's right. And in Ubuntu, it is I am because we are. That's the right?
Yeah.
And then there's the
and then we
corresponding-
are because I am.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's the responsibility. Right?
There's the reciprocity.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
But that sense of knowing that I'm part of a larger song, a part of a larger tune.
Absolutely.
And that my melody needs to fit in. This is, I think, an excellent metaphor for where the new sciences also find this idea of coherence. Because you look at it even at the quantum level,
Yes.
or at the, let's take a living organism at the cellular level. There's a way of explaining disease, cancer, as those cells that are no longer in syntony. They're no longer resonating with the same tune as the rest of the being. Right?
Like a malignant cancer cell is just a runaway cell, creating things that are not in consonance or resonance with that structure.
Yeah.
So there is actually some. One of the things we're doing at the Laszlo Institute now is exploring the implications for medicine, and we're looking at precisely how then can you. It's not reprogramming, but it's more like reminding right, the cells of their home melody.
Right. Yeah.
That can bring them back into this consonant
Yeah.
jam session with the rest of the being.
And we should think, because this co-evolutionary process goes both for us and the world, but also within our own selves.
Indeed.
We are 37 trillion cells. We have more cells in our biome than we do in our actual self that we usually think of. It's like we are this collection of life organized harmoniously through this coherent sense-making apparatus, which is heart and mind and all these different ways in which we cohere as an individual.
I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if this sense of being and this appreciation, this joy and awe, I mean, it's awesome to think that all that is going on.
It's
right, and we're not having to say, okay, I need to digest now.
Right.
I mean, it's going on.
It's the SuperCoherence.
Well, see, this is where we tie in exactly, because coherence is within the system, at least the way we define it, and coming from physics. So within a system, you have levels of coherence where everything, the ideal never happens there. There's always something that's slightly off, right? If it's never like 100% all down to the levels of the quarks aligned, it's not.
Yeah.
But that's all right. That's the dance. That's
right,
the breathing
and all
of that. Indeed, even in the cardiologist will say that a healthy heart dances.
Right.
So it never has a fixed.
If it's too rigid, it's an unhealthy heart.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So part of that is that, but allowing for that play space and having that coherence, so there's nothing seriously singing its own tune, going off in its own direction, because that's, again, a dis-ease, right, in the system. That's coherence. When you take that being, like a whole system, and then check to see, are we in a coherent relationship with our environment?
Right.
Now, okay, do we have harmonious relationships here? Is there lying? Is there dysfunctionality? Is there sabotage, intrigue? Okay, that's...
We hope not.
No, we hope not. But that's between the level of the system and its social environment, in this case, human beings, right? If we are in harmonious relationship on that level and harmonious relationship within, that's called supercoherence.
Yeah.
So internal is one level of coherence. External is another level of coherence. Combined is supercoherence.
It's like the superordinate coherence of the subjective and objective worlds,
Yeah.
so to speak. Or inside and outside worlds.
Inside and outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those might be, the mapping might not be quite symmetric.
Yeah.
One thing I'm kind of interested, you mentioned Descartes and kind of this unfair, we have a retrospective perspective looking at his work, and we see both where it shaped the world, but also perhaps where we're bumping up against the limitations of that mode of thought. Another thing that was really interesting that I came across recently along those lines was the history of how we came to view and study bacteria as like monocultures. I didn't know, but there was actually a time when each of them were, you look under the microscope and they were called fission organisms because people just couldn't conceive that there were thousands, if not millions of species under that microscope. And so they took a single little particle or a single bacterium out and in a petri dish, and that was the beginning of how we studied bacteria. And it was in this monoculture, right? It was in this hyper-rationalized context that was separated from the complex network in which it usually evolves and adapts. And therefore, we were only studying part of that supercoherence, or we were only studying the idea of how it behaves as an individual or as a monoculture, as opposed to the full dynamic expression of its potential. So that seems aligned with some of what you're saying. Is that?
I mean, don't we do that all the time still?
Yeah.
It's
totally
so interesting how the classical science, it's moving now.
Yeah,
right? But classical science, the place where you do it is the laboratory.
Yeah.
Right? And the laboratory is a place where you can exclude variables, and they don't have confounding effects. You can only study, the relationship between a couple of variables that you want to study. That's not the real world, right? And
it's a very small
being
part.
able to see how things interconnect, and when we have to exclude all the time, say, okay, that's too complex for us to work with. We'll just work with certain particular chains, and just from the point of view of physics, not chemistry, not biology. I mean, again, these domains, even disciplinary-wise, get separated and siloed. The system sciences are exactly about bringing this back into a systemic, integral understanding. Right? And it also has to be a lived understanding.
Absolutely.
And that's where we go beyond understanding here and the understanding here. And then it's the collective intelligence as well. We were talking about a wonderful book by this woman named Wendy Wheeler called The Whole Creature, where she starts to explore, is there such a thing as a collective being, like a collective intelligence, but the sense of identity as well? For example, in the murmuration of starlings and other things, right? Can we start to see them and see that they have almost rights, or maybe not almost, but that they are beings? How do we relate to that level? But we tend to parse things out, look at the bacteria by itself, see it over here, and not respect the Ubuntu-ness of our being, and that living community, living ecosystems, thinking in terms of ecosystems. One last thing here, sorry, going on like this, but
please continue.
We're
loving it.
We follow.
There's this political scientist over in Berkeley, Carolyn Merchant, who writes about different ethical frameworks. She talks about the egocentric, which is really the basis for all consumer capitalist frames, and it has to do with strident individualism and, hey, I look after number one. If everybody else did like I did, we wouldn't have any problems. But we have to take care of others because they're not able to take care of themselves. So I'm being responsible by just focusing on me. Egocentric ethic. Then the homocentric ethic, where we are, hey, we are humanity. We have to really care for each other and for ourselves. We don't want orangutans to disappear because we want our grandchildren to be able to actually see what they're like. But that's still It's not like the orangutans have rights. In that framework. Then there's the ecocentric framework, and this is where I want to get to, because the ecocentric framework is like, we are the planet, and she has this dialogue between an egocentric person and an ecocentric person. They're both in the rainforest, and one of them is trying to establish a mall there, and the other one's chained himself to the tree and says no. And so the egocentric guy says, why are you doing this? You're obstructing progress. We're bringing civilization where this is progress. What tree asked you to intervene? And the guy, the ecocentric guy, says, hey, I'm not a human being trying to protect the rainforest. I'm part of the rainforest trying to protect itself. So an expansion of identity and this sense of being actually a part of something much bigger.
And in line with that, how do we, in your mind, how do we bridge that gap between the ego and the ecocentric perspectives? What does that look like? What do those dialogues look like? That's a deep part of what we're trying to do here at Catalyzing Coherence, is find ways to help people from different perspectives. People are these functions of their past and their culture and what they value at that given point in time. And then we meet people who have entirely different pasts and entirely different perspectives. Like you just, you mentioned a situation very much like that. How do we bridge that? How do we start allowing that to kind of cohere?
Well, I think it's what you're doing. I mean, it's talking to people and it's connecting. There are three things I'm enamored of in my work play now. It's this idea of coherence that we talked about and supercoherence. This idea that we talked about already of consonance, right, which is conscious resonance, and how do we actually really align? That's the syntony dance. And then there's connection. So coherence, consonance, and connection. How do we bring that in? And in a framework that the Laszlo Institute is focusing on now, is bring it into 5 levels, so that you do this at all 5 levels. That's still an ideal. I don't know. But if we can practice this, say, how do we bring this into our lives? So it's really this curating this dance, this symphony, this jazz at these 5 levels. The first level is intrapersonal. How do we do it within ourselves? So like you said, we're like in amazing systems ourselves, not just biologically, but emotionally and ethically. We have all these things we have to think about and relate within ourselves. how are we a thriving system, right? So that's the first level of coherence, right? Being thriving systems ourselves. It's not egocentric. It's just being part of a garden of thriving systems.
Putting on our oxygen masks first to then go
exactly right. Yeah, being whole and integral. Exactly. The second level is the interpersonal coherence and connection and consonance. Right. So at that level, again, it's how do we have healthy relationships? How do we listen? What they talk about, active listening, right? Empathetic listening. So we're listening into not just to be able to make the next point, but saying, hey, what are they saying? Who's this being here with me? And we relate. We truly seek to connect. And how is that being actually me as well? Because we, in this field, we co-arise.
Yes. How do we establish the resonance?
Right. And the consonants, right?
And the consonants.
Yeah.
So that how do we do that? So that's the second level. So intrapersonal, interpersonal. Then comes the trans-species. How are we doing that same thing? That same patterning of that dance, that set of relationships with the more than human world.
Yeah.
And it's not just animals and plants. It's also rocks and rivers and the water cycle. I mean, it's how are we part of a thriving narrative?
Yeah. And Chardin talked about this, right? Like going back to, I talk about the Gaia principle, but then he uses the term of the noosphere.
Right. Very powerful.
Very powerful concept.
So how are we, what are we reading from? It's like read out and read in to the noosphere.
Yes.
Right? So how's that informing us, and how do we inform it? Because with our very thoughts,
it's what's building it.
Exactly.
It's a co-creative process.
Exactly. So that's the third level, right? There are two more. So intrapersonal, interpersonal, trans-species. Then there's the transgenerational. So how are we having that thriving conversation with our ancestors?
Yes.
What is it? What is the context like across time when you extrude it and you step back?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's the diachronic frame. How do we do this in a way that also not only is with ancestors but with future generations? It doesn't have to be our own offspring, but future generations of all beings. Are we? And this people can more relate to this. I think are we preparing a narrative that they're going to be able to take forward and thrive in, or a song, let's say, or is it going to be, really a barren, difficult narrative for them to live into that we prepare? So
there's a proverb, I forget, I think it's of Turkish origin, that goes something like, society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they will never sit under.
Beautiful.
When we have this connection with our children, our children's children, and we see the stream of life through which we are coming through ourselves, through the elders, through our past, through spirit, manifesting itself through this evolutionary process that takes form in ways that are now human. Now there is some life spirit, right? The starlings, there's something of an essence, a qualia that is hard to put our finger on, but it is this dance that we're trying to tap into. It's why I really love the notion of Tao and this underlying graceful tuning of yin and yang, this tension that emerges and all of life bubbles forth through that.
These are the perennial wisdom,
right?
And when you're even quoting that, what you were just sharing about the men preparing, planting trees and so on. For me, it's exactly doing that. You're functioning at that fourth level now. When you do that, you are remembering. You're bringing membership back into. Bringing membership back into remembering, and that helps restore or restory.
Yes.
Restory our futures.
And the recognition to recognate.
Right.
But
for me, it's in a way, it's memories of things yet to come. Pablo Neruda has a nice phrase around that.
Yes.
He talks about recuerdos del porvenir. Memories of things yet to come.
Beautiful.
It's like a future resonance.
But our relationship with time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we're not there yet. But okay, so the fourth level is this one on that relates a little bit to time, right? To the past and future generations, and how are we in that syntony? Dialogue in that frame. So you got those four levels, and the fifth is what we call the pan-cosmic, and that's where you're saying exactly, Brian, right now that we're in this. The starlings tap into this noosphere. The noosphere is actually something that, yes, is a sphere of this planet, but it's in the cosmos. There's an anima mundi that underlies
like nested
the entire
spheres on
cosmos.
spheres on spheres on spheres,
Exactly.
all interacting, all sending information to each other.
And it's
resonating.
not disconnected. We're not like some in our universe of our own. We're part of an integral, unitary, holographic cosmos that is mutually informed all the time. So it's recognizing that. It's this having these coordinate systems that are separate from each other, right? This Cartesian
duality. I mean,
frameworks.
he's ultimately espousing a duality
That's
that we're still recovering from today.
And that, I think, is what the new sciences are recognizing.
Yeah.
We're not in a dualistic universe,
Yeah.
but that all matter, energy, consciousness can be expressed in terms of vibrational patterns and packages of vibration. But it requires a new paradigm, because when we would take this in physics down to the smallest meaningful measurement unit, which is the Planck length, what they find at that level is no thing. There's nothing there, but there is a vibrational signature.
Just pattern.
Right. And there's a certain that vibrate, but people with our old paradigm, we'd have to say, okay, so what's vibrating? Something has to vibrate. No. Vibration is.
Yeah.
But with the old paradigm, that doesn't make sense. You have to say, well, wait, something has to be vibrating.
Yeah.
No, actually, it is the vibration that causes the thingness. So what we perceive as material is actually high frequency, high amplitude packets of vibration.
The thingness is the interference pattern.
Yes,
is the
exactly.
emergent interaction of the underlying vibrations in your worldview, or in the way that you're saying this.
Alan Watts would talk about how if we had the right timing, we could actually stick our hand into a rock and pull it up, because it's doing this. It's blinking on and off in certain ways.
Yeah, I had another. Watts is a big influence on me, and I think Matthew as well. Going back to this Cartesian duality, he says something on Taoism. I think it's actually a perfect summary of what Taoism is in many ways. He says, it is the recognition that there is an explicit duality within an implicit oneness. And so really what we might perceive as mind or body or energy or matter or yin or yang or all this tension is actually it's inherent within this wholeness, and that this is the dance of life.
And David Bohm brought this forward really nicely in his conversation with Krishnamurti and others. I mean, this is
some great conversations they had.
They had.
Yeah, it's like a very generative tension as well, and that the idea of the duality within the oneness can also be mapped onto the idea of healthy or generative competition within cooperative structures, right? So not necessarily having these runaway structures of
the yin and yang
hyper-focus.
again.
Yeah, exactly.
It's what you were talking about, how structures can both create. I mean, if you think about it, we're sitting in this building, and it's providing us with structure that is really helpful, because especially here you have soundproofing, etc., right? Yeah. But it also provides obstacles. If we need to get out of the building in a hurry, there are only certain places where we can go.
Constraints flow.
Right, constraints. So it's both provides support and constraints.
Yeah.
And that's the nature of the structures of systems.
Yeah.
How do we play with that so that the constraint aspect doesn't limit our creative our Syntonious evolution?
Yeah.
I know I was going to use harmonious, but we can do that already. We're talking about But that, I think, that's part of the consonance where we then, it's not playing God. It's not saying we're going to make it be in this way. This is a wonderful proverb that says, we cannot direct the wind, but we can adjust the sails.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Yes,
that's a beautiful proverb.
Learning how to do that, how to flow with it.
Yeah.
And
then understanding the limitations of that as well, and perhaps being okay with that, or adapting to it, as opposed to fighting against it.
Exactly.
And
knowing when you're flowing with, and then how to. It's not always that you meet it head on.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the obliquity of it as well, making oblique paths.
And this is so. I mean, let's talk about some complexity science as well. I know you're familiar with this way of sort of organizing all these different disciplines that we find. We often talk about cybernetics on this show, and cybernetics is a Greek word. It means stewardship, right? It literally is the art of control and communication in systems, both biological and machine. It is basically trying to say, here's a system. It is trying to get from point A to point B. Like I again, using myth and metaphor, I like the notion of Ulysses. Ulysses is in Troy. He's away from his home. He's trying to go back to Ithaca to reunite with Penelope and Telemachus, and this, all this story around the idea of getting from one place to another. How do you do that? And we live our lives through narrative. So there's a lot of sort of cultural inertia that's informing our every move and decision. But cybernetics is this underlying framework, these principles through which we can navigate all these different variables that life throws at us. And this is where the dance is so, it's where we should place more of a sense of art, perhaps, or craftsmanship. Like, how do we navigate these waters? How do we see the wind and actually start to move and let it sort of have us, journey forward with its directionality at our back? And so this idea of coherence, this idea of syntropy, all these are metaphors that can inform our present moment. And so taking this back to paradigms, it seems as if we're on the approach of a new paradigm where all of these ideas can be felt and experienced and known across cultures, across time, and can be what we're now moving into more of an embodiment of these ideas, both in ourselves, but then also in our collective self. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting that you frame the work at the Laszlo Institute as looking at new paradigms. We often talk about the structure of scientific revolutions as well, and looking at how, you go from the world is flat to the world is round, from the sun revolves around the earth to the earth revolves around the sun, from the Newtonian clockwork to Einsteinian space-time relativity to the quantum flux we find ourselves in today. How do these new paradigms unfold? And it seems like, I feel, we're on the precipice of a new paradigm. And how does your work inform that sort of unfolding, that manifestation of these ideas into the world in impactful ways?
Well, again, for me, it's what we are doing, and the people who are engaging with us, listening in, and connecting. Mm-hmm. This is not anymore the work of a Descartes or a Ulysses. We're really also looking for, in a process now, of a co-emergence that will require a new mythos. Mm-hmm. So the ancient Greek mythos of the hero who goes and battles and comes back victorious, or Joseph Campbell's hero journey. Now, we still have that same journey, but we can do and must do this together.
Exactly. We're all having our own hero's journey.
That's right. So this again goes back to this idea of that strident individualism, which is so endemic to our Western world ways, plus that egocentric frame that we talked about earlier from Carolyn Merchant. I'm starting to now look at how are we an expression of a field, not just a human field, but what is now emerging that is speaking through us. Beautiful. I love this quote from Hafiz, the 14th century poet.
He's great.
He said, the Persian poet, he said, I am the hole on the flute through which God's breath blows.
Prana. Life.
And, this idea of, he didn't say, I am the flute.
Yeah. It's also kind of like the sailboat metaphor in that sense, where it's like if you're that hole, you have control to some extent over what flows through you, and therefore how you manipulate or how do you modulate that flow so that others can resonate with it.
And indeed, it means getting out of the way.
Yes.
If you want to be the hole, it's not like, hey, I'm the guy who is going to tell you how to do this. I'm the hero. I'm the whatever. It's a different form of leadership.
Yeah.
It's the leadership that allows for the emergence of the murmuration of the starlings. You don't have one bird who says, okay, everybody gather around and I got a choreography for us all. Okay, so I have a plan. You'll be over there. No, we don't do that.
The Victorian element.
Right. It's right. So learning that step that nature has been doing, right? This is the improvisational jazz ensemble that nature has been doing. How do we learn into that? And the strictures of command and control that were in early cybernetics, from the early Shannon and Weaver and Norbert Wiener and others, but it's moved beyond that
to
now.
Second order cybernetics,
second order and third order cybernetics, where we start to look at.
We know that we know.
That's right. We are part of the system that we are observing, but we're also then looking how do we remember or re-narrate, right? Change the entire narrative around this. And that doesn't come from
remember.
us
I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
So for me, this does get supported very much by the sciences of complexity, cybernetics, general evolution theory, evolutionary systems theory, and so on. And this systems perspective, and cybernetics is a systems perspective. Yeah. Bringing that in with science, it does help us put on new lenses to see the interconnectedness, the interdependence, and the interrelationship of this mutuality. And again, this for me means that we're living in a world where individuality, it's great. I mean, we all are our unique song. It should be celebrated.
Yes.
Right? But we don't have to fear the codependency
Right.
when we are working with others to say, okay, your reality conditions mine.
Right.
But we can create an interdependency
Yes.
where what we do does affect each other, but not in a way that restrains, but allows for. And I'm sure that's what, actually, not sure. I would imagine that that's what the starlings do as well, because there is no murmuration without the birds there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they all got to be there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
That's the Ubuntu again. But at the same time, they each benefit from what all the others are doing.
Yes.
And they have to be there themselves to make that emerge.
Yeah.
Isn't this the life on this
Yes,
planet
it is.
and in the universe?
Very much.
It's nobody makes it happen.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we make it happen.
Yeah.
And the quality of that making, the quality of the air that blows through that hole on the flutes, that I think is what we most
Yes.
affect.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the tune and so on. That's getting out of the way and allowing for that emergence.
Yes.
But we can have the universe flow through us. I took a seminar once with a workshop with Mali Doma Somé. It was Sobonfu Somé, who passed away recently. And she asked at the beginning, "Why are you here?" It was kind of accusatory. So, why are you here?
Yeah.
I said, I want to learn how to dance. I want to learn how to dance the dance that the universe has been dancing since forever.
Yeah.
And I feel I keep stepping on other people's toes. I step on my own toes.
Yeah.
I want to know how to dance more fluidly.
Yeah.
By the end of the seminar, I changed it. And I said, you know what I really want to do is I want to learn how to be danced.
Yeah.
Seems like a little difference. It's a huge difference.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the dancer. I want to be danced by all that is emerging around me. And right now I'm being danced in this conversation by both of you.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm coming alive. My aliveness is because of you and this interaction, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I think, what we can listen into more. And when you ask, how do we do this? How do we bring this in? It is listening into so that we are that participatory engagement in that dance of syntony.
Yes.
You know? It's something we can learn how to do better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's also a wonderful way of beginning to explore something else that is a core thematic of some of your work, which is this notion of science and spirituality as a living field of consciousness, I think is how you put it. And that's
Exactly.
beautiful in this notion that, I think it's there's a lot of symmetry between what you were just talking about with respect to having different parts of the whole that may or may not recognize that they are in this dance, or that they may be dancing one another, and the interactions between the participants of the dance have, it is imperative that they understand that they're in a dance, and that they understand how to make something elegant and beautiful rather than destructive. So in that vein, it seems as if we're at the tail end of this period of time in which we've created another duality between the idea of scientific inquiry and spiritualistic inner knowledge. And I'm curious how you see those two parts of our world beginning to come back and perhaps dance more elegantly with one another.
Yeah.
Wow. That's great. I was wanting to go here.
Good.
So
We're going there.
let's take this a little bit into the science of it, and then we bring this into... I want to take it into meditation practice afterwards. So because that's, again, this how do we develop new habits of being and becoming, right? Being and becoming. We talked about that. Being and becoming.
That's the paradigm.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think from science, what we're learning with this coherence, right? I'm going to focus on that aspect, is that matter actually is these coherent packets of vibration that have high amplitude and high frequency. So matter decays over time, and it has a relatively short lifespan in the universe, right? So things that we can see with our five senses, see, hear, taste, smell, touch, with our five senses are things that we call that the universe. They're things in the universe. They're in the manifest reality. They emerge from the zero-point energy field, this quantum vacuum, which truly is a plenum. It's not a vacuum. It's actually a plenum because it's a sea of potential.
Yeah.
And it's consciousness. It's not the consciousness that we have as individual beings, but it's a collective consciousness of the universe, not collective human consciousness, because that would be like anthropocentric for the whole universe.
Yeah.
It's not that.
Yeah.
And it's not anything we can relate to as our own consciousness. It's the basis out of which emerges matter and energy, and also thought.
Is in your mind, is that the flow of energy or the flow of air that's moving through the flute?
Yes,
Ooh,
yes.
good, yeah.
Yes, it's beautiful. That's the relationship between the cosmos, which embeds and gives rise to the universe.
Mm-hmm.
The cosmos is actually bigger than the universe because it contains those aspects that can't be accessed
Right.
by contemporary science that's
Right.
based on the five disciplines, on the five senses, rather. But it contains things that we can sense and know. When you walk into a forest, you can sense something bad happened here. There's something here. I don't know what it is, but I got that feeling. It's what the sailors would say. I feel it in my bones. It's this kind of knowing. Or you walk into another forest and like, oh my God, there's such peace and beauty
Right.
here. I feel so. I don't know what this feeling is, but it's a great feeling.
Yeah.
Right. There's something here. There's love. So that sensing is not a knowing that we get by tapping into things we perceive directly through the five senses, but it's a different whole system
Right.
knowing, and
Yeah.
we have the ability to have that whole system
Yeah.
knowing. In any event, the physical things in the universe have that high frequency and high amplitude, and they decay over time. Those aspects that are not accessible through the five senses, but are like a thought, an emotion. Like you tell me, point to a thought. Point to where it is in the head. Right? You can talk, well, okay, there's this, but that's not the thought. Even if the synapses are
It's a
firing.
chain of events.
But that's
process.
not the thought. Right?
Right, the
Yeah.
thought is like the...
Exactly.
There's some
Yeah.
highly complex interaction of many
That's right.
factors
Yeah.
And it
that are
relates to
giving
the
rise
thought,
to a
but
thought.
it's
at
not
one
the
point.
thought.
Yeah.
Right. And again, that's
Right.
from Zen Buddhism. That's Alan Watts talks a lot about that as well. We mistake the map for the territory.
Yeah.
It's like
General
it's
semantics,
scientifically, or it's
Krzyzewski.
impossible to, with our current scientific tools, or maybe any scientific tools, kind of excise the lines of that
Exactly.
thought with like a scalpel of science
Right.
from the rest of the environmental
Or the
world.
emotion. Right. And there's so many things that we can't say, okay, here it is. Here's the emotion. Oh, the emotion. But in different cultures, it's in different places we hold it, right?
Yeah.
The bottom line, it's not there. And this is where it comes, doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? But it's not there in the frame of the universe. It's in the frame of the cosmos. The cosmos holds that field which often has been talked about in spiritual traditions and some as the Akashic Field. And the Akashic Field is the field of memory, the memory field. We can't explain so many phenomena of consciousness with our contemporary science. There's enough evidence that, again, this isn't direct measurement, but there's enough evidence for people who live full lives, but when they are 4 or younger, they have knowledge of places
Yeah.
and of events
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense. They were never there, or there was a
I'll
different
give
time.
you an example of that. I remember I have a very strange memory, and I was like maybe 3.5 years old in St. Louis with my mother. And my mother was lost, driving around, and I didn't know how I knew how to go home. But I had this deep sense of knowingness of how to navigate back home. And like, as like a 3.5 or 4-year-old, I like guided us home without knowing necessarily how I did it. Or like memories, like when I was a child, where I was like, I didn't know how I knew something whatsoever.
Isn't that amazing?
But
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, but we see, this is where partly also the Laszlo Institute focused on education, because we damp that out. In fact, there's a book by Leonard Schlein called The Alphabet versus the Goddess.
Ooh.
And he studies how in different cultures, especially those that have non-pictographic, non-iconographic languages, right? So it's just
So like syllabic or phonetic.
right, where
Yeah.
you put together words with letters.
Yeah.
Basically, when we learn how to read and write before the and do math before the age 7, and here's words, we kill our relationship with the magical, mystical sense of the world.
Do you think that's because it's more abstract in that sense,
We start
as
to
opposed to
rationalize
pictographic?
it,
Like,
and it starts to be here,
Yeah.
and we stop to think
Yeah.
with here or here.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a kind of thinking that comes from here,
Totally.
right? And it's that what you were doing when you were 3.
yeah, like the intuition or the resonance with.
It's informed intuition,
Yeah.
right? So this is what we're seeking to cultivate as well. But let me get back to the science. We could put this into the spirituality business. So we got the things matter that has that kind of high frequency, but the things that have low frequency, low amplitude, are thoughts, are ideas, are. It doesn't mean that they don't disappear. We can lose that, but they stay in this Akashic field. It's a dimension that can't be accessed, but in the physical universe, but it literally informs, put form into the physical universe.
Is that related to some of like Sheldrake's work?
Very much so.
Yeah.
He talks about morphogenetic and morphic fields,
exactly.
right? But those are localized. So this is now looking at it at a universal frame,
Yeah.
saying that there is and David Bohm's implicate and explicate order, right? It's the same meme, if you will, right?
There's a meme as a bumper sticker that Terence McKenna used to talk about. He goes, "Man thinks, God knows, man thinks." That there's something beyond our conscious awareness that we actually can tap into as well.
That's the hole in the flute again, right?
Yeah.
How do we flow that, or how are we being flowed,
Yeah.
right? When we let that happen. And a lot of that letting happen is seeing that, if you want to take it into that framework of God or who, I wouldn't necessarily
Some
go
abstract metaphor to...
But I see it that is what we are being and doing when we are in syntony.
Yes.
That is the
Yes.
breath, if you
Yes.
will, of God.
It's like as the air flows through our separate holes, we make our unique sounds, and then it comes out back into the universe and becomes once again the wind that flows back into
informs
the flute.
right. It helps pattern in the universe, and that can be accessed
Rhythm.
by others, right? That's why it's holographic, it's transtemporal and non-local. This field, the Akashic Field.
Yeah.
So if we look at that, then we get to the idea that there is the possibility of disincarnate consciousness. So what happens to us when we die? This is part of, we have a book called, that I wrote with my father, better said he wrote it with me, right? Because he did the genius work on it. And it's called What is Reality? The New Map of Cosmos and Consciousness. And what we look at then brings together so many different thinkers. Now, we didn't only write, we brought together a variety of neuroscientists and biologists and sociologists.
You had some great people tied to that book.
Really interesting people.
Yeah.
So what we explored together, including some spiritual leaders and mystics as well, but again informed. We're trying to separate the wheat from the chaff and make sure it's not quackery. Right. So
which is difficult in a realm where it's so esoteric. We were kind of feeling in the dark.
But does it have that consonance? Does it actually ring true with a broader sense of, like, can it be replicated in the sense, not maybe direct, but you see that other people have said similar things over time.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's where the spiritual traditions come in very importantly as well. So what they look at here is that there's the notion that this patterning in the universe that leads to high frequency, high amplitude things that we see and observe, and other aspects that we know that are real, emotions, love, real, but we can't, like, here it is.
Yeah, right.
And thoughts and ideas and creativity. These are things that you can't point to, but they're a huge part of our cosmos.
Do you think there's something to the idea that, because, I mean, I'm getting this idea or this visual in my mind of, the cosmic background microwave radiation, of this kind of encapsulating low amplitude pattern that isn't quite high amplitude or it doesn't concentrate enough to break into our domain of consciousness that we've adapted to. It seems like, because you're making that distinction between these high amplitude and low amplitude types of vibrations, where it seems as if in our conscious mind, or maybe perhaps the conscious mind as we know it, is adapted to the former but not the latter. Do you think that's
no?
Okay.
I wouldn't say that. I said that they're both present, but because of our cultural, consider many cultures that are adapted to this.
Interesting.
That hold this. I mean, it gets a little.
So you
bit
think
back
that's more
to
like the linguistic element that you were talking about shapes that more
That's
than
right.
okay.
That's right. There are cultures which have a different. No, all of the, not all, because again there's quackery involved, but many shamanic traditions.
Yes.
Move along these lines directly. They talk about a technology of consciousness and about ways of knowing that we can't get to through our science, but that affirms similar patterns, but they do it through a different way of knowing.
Or when you ask them how they figured out which plants to put in the ayahuasca, they tell you the plants.
That's right. You see, so again, so we have the capacity to access, but in our Western educational system, primarily, we are scared to be informed by that. It has to come from, otherwise we lose control, and we lose certainty. But we don't allow something to flow through us.
Yes.
Like, whoa, what are we we're possessed.
We're holding on so tightly to that previous paradigm.
That ego,
Yeah.
me.
Yeah,
I'm in
yeah.
charge. I'm in charge.
Yeah.
But how do we didn't allow us to be in charge? But again, just sorry to come back. So we got the
Of course.
physical stuff,
Yeah.
high amplitude, high frequency, and then we have the world of ideas, emotions, spirit,
Yeah.
if you will put it in a broader sense.
Yeah.
Okay, that's low amplitude, low frequency, and has a very low decay cycle. So because of the low amplitude, low frequency, so we can
And
think
operates over long timescales as well, then, because of
timescales.
that amplitude.
It seems maybe almost eternal. Right?
Yeah.
It seems that, but
The cosmic ohm.
indeed. But we as human beings or as life, you take a dead body, put it there, and you take a living body, put it there, and they're both, let's say, inert. Let's say one of them's in a deep sleep, and the other ones, and you can barely see them breathing, right? Maybe if you aren't really centered and connected, you would say, well, they're both the same. But you can know. You get close to them, you can know which is alive. What's the difference? How is one alive and one is just a dead body that's not animate, right? This is, Frankenstein, all that kind of like that, all that question. What we're coming to look at is, and this is just a theory. This is not, or rather better said, it's a hypothesis. It's not even an established theory. This is just a hypothesis, but I'm exploring this myself.
Yeah.
So this is where I am in my inquiry. Doesn't mean this is like, oh, this is what it is,
Can
right?
I preface this?
That's my inquiry.
McLuhan said, mysticism is just tomorrow's science dream today.
And was it Arthur C. Clarke who said any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic?
Yes.
Right? So all these things, right? So what we don't know that we don't know, right?
It's why we use art a lot, because art actually helps.
evokes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly. So, but here's where I'm going with this. My hypothesis. I'm saying, okay,
Please.
so look, you have the high amplitude, high frequency matter, and when the low amplitude, low frequency patterns, not matter, but patterns, merge with that, you get an amalgam.
Yep.
And that amalgam, and it's like, you take lead and gold, you get an amalgam.
Yeah.
Right? I forgot the name of the thing, but you get something else. And then you can separate them out again with sufficient heat, right? But they have special property when it's one, and it becomes one thing.
Yeah.
We, as a living beings, are both high amplitude, high frequency matter, and we are low amplitude, low frequency thought, emotion, spirit. And that is when we are combined. When we die, the low amplitude, low frequency goes its own way.
Right.
And the matter goes its own way and recycles.
Yeah.
They're
right?
no longer bound. in
They're
that
no longer
sense.
bound.
Yeah.
They're no longer coherent.
That's right.
Yeah.
They
And
decohered.
it could be coincidental, but part of that this incarnate consciousness can return into matter at another point, right? So this will get into the potentials of understanding things in terms of whether it's reincarnation or what, but it's the idea that there is this incarnate consciousness has a variety of different potential paths that we have studied from. Now this is where you go to the spirituality, the whole understandings of the bardo and the different paths, and interesting to explore, and we can't write it off as being it's not absurd. That's what's interesting about it. And for me, this has implications now for, and this is the last thing I'll say on this part, for how I meditate.
Please.
Because often we meditate in one way at one time, in one way. So we try to go into our inner world. We try to calm, slow things down, and we connect to the eternal. That is absolutely great. But that's on that one dimension of our being, which is the low frequency, low amplitude, which does connect us to the more holographic dimensions of our universe. It does take us into those domains. Fantastic. But we leave or ignore or don't pay attention to our body in those ways, our physical aspects. If you follow somebody who is in sports when they get in the zone, right, or people who train in the martial arts, and I do a lot of training in that as well, you want to be very present. It's a different form of meditation. You want to be all your senses are awake. They talk about being raw, relaxed, awake, and waiting. You're in a ready state.
Yeah.
So you can hear things that are happening outside of the building because you're not hearing, but you're connected.
Yeah.
So when you're in that kind of very highly attuned physical presence state, you can perceive things around you that you can tune into a conversation over there. You can tune into what's happening outside the building.
Yeah.
You can be aware of.
Yeah.
When your chi is very highly active and attuned. So for me, in meditation, I now seek to do both. It's like the Tuvan throat singers who can hold two notes at one time, right? Or the whirling dervishes who connect both to the eternal and to the terrenal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? And
Head in the clouds, feet on the ground.
that's right.
Yeah.
Right. And all the I Ching, which has this, the
Heaven and earth.
Heaven and earth.
Yes.
So, but connecting to both.
Yes.
Simultaneously. It's like holding those two notes simultaneously. So both calm,
Yes.
relaxed, open,
Yes.
ready, but also in your body, present in the moment, here and now.
Yes.
That is our true aliveness. Then
Yes.
you really are alive.
Totally.
you
It
know?
will stretch you to make a greater space
Yeah.
for your
Right.
being.
And I think when you asked earlier, what are the practices that we can bring this, bring this kind of syntony and this coherence, this supercoherence? It's practicing that dual holding to connect with all those, as I mentioned, those levels that the interpersonal, the transspecies, the transgenerational, and the pan-cosmic. You can do that when you kind of... It's like when in a bicycle wheel, the old kind that has spokes. I don't know, they're changing. But you would true the wheel. I remember I'd have
Pre-carbon
to true
fiber
the
era.
wheel. Right, I don't know. I will come to that. I'd have to true the wheel, right? So to make sure that it wasn't wobbly, right?
Yeah.
And when it ran true, it would run smoothly. There wouldn't be a wobble in it at all because you'd have all those nicely aligned, harmoniously aligned.
Right.
This is a practice, I think, of truing,
Yes.
right? Our truing ourselves.
Yes.
And that can allow us to be better holes in the flute. And the music will flow through with more clear tones.
Yeah.
Right? And that's all it is. It's honing ourselves to be better expressions of the universe.
It's a lightening. It actually feels, there's a sense of levity, this feeling, a lightness. And so you can think about this flow, just allowing for spirit to move through form in the most sort of gentle way.
And why do you think it's a lightning? I mean, I think so too.
Yeah.
But
So
I'm not sure. It's almost there's a kind of release and relief in this.
Yeah, I think by giving way to flow, I think flow leads to lightness. So Jack Nicholson, the golfer, talked about how he would hold a golf club as like a bird.
Right.
That you don't want to squeeze it too tight, but you want to have a firm grip on it. That I don't know. I just think bringing in sport as a metaphor, bringing in musicians, that they're not heavy when they're playing. They're actually they're light. They're allowing for their greatest expression of themselves.
Right.
And yeah.
Well, Matthew, this is what you were talking about also earlier in terms of structure, right? I mean, if you have too much of it, then you're constrained.
Right.
If you have too little of it,
Right.
it's oceanic, and you can't, have no platform to stand on.
Yeah.
So it's this bound. That's, I think, this dual holding, knowing that it's a unitary universe, right?
Yes.
It's not dualistic. Frankly, we're all, in the end, the yin and yang are one, right? Because you look at a baseball, it is a perfect yin and yang symbol in 3D, right? You know the way it's sewn? If you look at it flat on, that sewing is a yin and yang symbol if you look at it flat.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yin and yang actually are this, right? And it's a one holding. It's a one unity, right? We can see those two parts, the light and the dark, and so on.
Buckminster Fuller's map of the world actually is similar.
The geoscopes.
Yeah.
I think the lightness as well. I think it possibly has something to do with this. When you strike that balance, when it is in balance, when your tone is clear, there's this reduction of friction. It's nonlinear, and you hit it almost kind of like a superconductivity. Yeah. Right. And if you're in that moment, then you are quite literally a vessel through which the universe flows in a way that is effortless and in a way that is more capable of creating those types of harmonics or resonances that are also identifiable by others and can draw people
ecstasy?
to you.
I mean, this is ecstasis, right? And
ecstatic moment.
Ecstatic moment is the sense of. I live for these things. I mean, when there's a moment that it's almost as if a bell goes off inside, and and it can be brought on by a great conversation.
Yeah.
Right? It can be brought on by a smile of a child.
Yeah.
It can be brought on by seeing an athlete do something that is just expressing themselves so beautifully.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know that when they did that expression, it wasn't because they somehow like, oh, I'm going to make my move. It was a whole expression.
Totally.
Right? That wholeness, or the light coming through the trees in a certain way. Those are moments when there is an expression of the ecstasy of the universe.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's joy and awe.
Yeah.
And for me, this is, I think, where we're moving beyond the focus on sustainability as a species is very important. We need to be sustainable. We need to learn how to live within the carrying capacity of our planet. But we have much more potential and much more, I think, responsibility in a way, responsibility to be the a part of that cosmic jam session that expresses joy and awe. This is thrivability.
Yes.
It's beyond
It's the thrivability. Yeah.
This is more joy and awe. It's not just like we're going to get to some neutral thing. We're going, are we sustainable? Are we sustainable?
Right.
No, we can be sustainable, and then we can actually build art and all these beautiful things that arise through that abundant world that we can help build.
And create carrying capacities that we can't even imagine at the moment.
You know, I had a...
For all of life.
Exactly.
Yes. All sentient beings.
A student who put this once, so funny, so good. He said, okay, we got to move from scarcity to abundance. When you think about scarcity, it's like scare city. We're in a city. And
I love the way that you break down words.
Right?
It's such a wonderful
City.
communication mechanism.
And we got to move to abundance and start to shake it. Abundance, you know? Yes. That's
it's so memorable.
Of it.
It's so good.
So it has to have play to it as well.
Totally.
And maybe it's one of the fewer last things for me. The idea of, we talk about people who talk the talk only, right? And then you got to learn how to walk the talk.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Great. So that's being coherent.
Yeah.
Cool. And being, have integrity. But people still do walk the talk, and then they go home and they do other things, right? They really know how to show you, but they may not be really living integrity. People who live the walk. It's just their way of being. You can tell they live the walk. They're not trying. Still, I've met people who live the walk with a real holier-than-thou attitude. I'm living it better than you. And I'm more sustainable or whatever. I'm more enlightened. Right?
Yeah.
Competition of enlightenment.
Alan Watts was like, talking about even like the competition between gurus, and a guru talking about another guru as kind of being part of that competitive game, but yet the guru mentioning the fact that another guru is trying to compete is in itself a form of, but I'm not like that guru. I'm above that.
It's still the same game.
Escape it.
I have more nothingness.
I'm more of the nothing.
But so what I really like, moving beyond the idea of living the walk, is you can do it as like in a real, holier than thou frame, is dancing the path. People play with it a little bit. They don't take themselves. I mean, this should be serious fun.
Yes.
Right? It has to have. Yes. When you pack the logs too tightly, there's this whole thing, right? There's no fire, right? There's a little bit of the play between that, allowing for the breath to come through. It's not all the precision work of the engineering or of the science in its strict form. It's also allowing for the unexpected.
Totally.
Allowing for things that, this is where if you're not curating emergence, but you're just trying to fulfill the plans that you have, there is no emergence. You're just fulfilling your plans.
Yeah.
But
it's all convergent.
Right. So holding back and saying, I don't know what's happening, but let's see. But knowing that this is a fertile trusting aligned on those 5, right? There's all healthy syntony along those 5 domains.
Yes.
Then you can allow things to flow through without, and again, just holding space. We talk about creating systemic nurturance spaces, not just finding the systemic leverage points. Right? How are we going to shift the system?
Yeah.
That's very reductionistic. How do we create those systemic nurturance spaces?
Yeah.
Where you feel called.
Yes. I love that concept of holding space. It's what we're trying to do in a lot of ways. It's even just your presence, I feel as well. You hold space. When I greeted you with a hug, we were talking about just that allowing of heart connection with ourselves, with each other. I was listening to Jack Kornfield talk the other day about this metaphor of us all being gardeners.
Beautiful.
And all of us all around the world, we're gardening in our own worlds, and we're part of this permacultural garden together. And we're coming up on our time here. And I think we can just sort of end in that sentiment of of what we're doing here. We're holding space together, and it feels really good. It feels really enlivening and coherent. And as we move through the world, you're heading back to Buenos Aires?
I am.
You know, we're all in different parts of the world, folks out here listening, you know, wherever they find themselves. This is a collective process that we're all doing together. And it starts with this knowledge, this knowing, this awareness. But then it actually is embodied in our lives and in our shared world.
I think that as gardeners, you know, and it's a great metaphor, being ecosystem gardeners.
Yes.
But all sorts of ecosystems, not just the, you know, I mean, they're all sorts, right?
Take care of yourself, take care of your brother, your sister,
you are like
everyone.
Exemplary gardeners, right? And this wouldn't have happened. And we've gardened this wonderful, for me, wonderful conversation and exploration. I've learned tremendously from both of you, but the kind of learning that is not like, oh, I got the new formula. No, I've learned about humaning.
Yes,
right? Humaning together, and I think that's for me just so rich. And knowing that there are many different types of gardens, right? So it's okay to be a gardener of a French garden, which is very different than an English garden, right? And that's very different from gardens in Amazon, right? And not thinking there's one right way,
right.
But saying, you know, we're all curating this field of emergence, right?
We all come to the gardening convention together.
And don't say, hey, look,
let's share our harvest. We can trade.
I got Roundup. No, we're not with that, right? It's has to come from ourselves, from here. And that's we bring ourselves to the garden.
Alexander, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and everything. And
thank you.
I'm deeply appreciative of you joining us today.
Yeah.
I'm so happy that Brian, that you and Brian found one another at the Long Now, and this was absolutely wonderful. I'm going to be high for the rest of the day.
Namaste, friends.
Ashe.
Thank you.